Every path we walk holds secrets. Some are in plain sight, some are waiting to be discovered. What if, on an ordinary day, you stumbled upon something extraordinary? An unknown place, shrouded in mystery and power. Not long ago, I found such a place. Deep in the woods behind my house, an ancient well called to me. And when I touched it, everything changed. It was some kind of portal, some kind of looking glass into Aldarion. A world of light and shadow, of choices and consequences. A world that feels closer to our own than you might think. Through that well, I see it all happening now, today, as we speak. These are their stories, their destinies, and I am here to share them with you. So come with me, my friends. Join me in this journey beyond the well. In Awakening, Episode 3, The Path Chosen. The embers in the hearth had long since cooled, but Halstenhald had sat unmoved at the worn wooden table. The candle between him and his son flickered, and cast its weak glow illuminating the lines of worry on the shoemaker's face. Ter'Ryn had not spoken, though his mind was aflame with Orin's words. The Nexus, the shadow, the choice. It had never really occurred to him that the strange instincts he carried, his ability to sense, to move, to know things before they happened, that they meant something. Yet Orin had seen it immediately, and more than that, Orin had spoken of a greater battle, one that stretched beyond the mere skirmishes of schoolyard fights. Halston exhaled heavily, finally breaking the silence. "You want to go?" Ter'Ryn hesitated. I don't know." His father nodded slowly, as if he had already known the answer. He stared into the small flame. "Orin's words are difficult. The Nexus, shadow, the light. I've heard it all before, wrapped in myth and warning." He looked up. "And yet, I've never seen a man like him." Ter'Ryn swallowed. "He knew about the animals, Pap. He could feel them." "A trick," Halston muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. No, Ter'Ryn insisted. "It wasn't a trick. Father, you saw his eyes." Halston sighed, running a hand down his face. "I know, son, I know." He leaned forward, his voice soft. "Elion has given you a choice, but it comes with weight. If you follow him, Ter'Ryn, your life will not be your own. You will bear responsibility for what you know and what you do. That is not an easy burden." Ter'Ryn clenched his fists. "And if I stay?" His father studied him for a long moment, then quietly said, "Then you will always wonder." That settled it. Ter'Ryn's heart pounded as he rose, already moving towards his room to gather what little he owned. Halston's voice stopped him. "You are my son, and I will always be proud of you." Ter'Ryn bowed his head and turned and disappeared into the shadows of his room. Dawn was breaking when Ter'Ryn reached the eastern road, the sky painted in soft hues of purple and gold. Orin stood waiting, his cloak drawn against the morning chill, his stance relaxed yet purposeful. "You're late," the old warrior said, though his voice carried no reprimand. "I had to say goodbye," Ter'Ryn admitted. Orin nodded. "A hard thing, but necessary. Come, we begin immediately." He gestured towards the road. They walked in silence for some time, the rolling hills of Meridian stretching before them. Ter'Ryn expected Orin to begin some form of instruction, but the older man remained quiet. Eventually, the boy spoke. "Well, what do we do now?" Orin smirked, looking down at the trail. "Now? We walk." And Orin nodded his head toward the narrow path leading up into the Dunholt wood. They traveled for the duration of that day and set up camp. "We will camp here at least for a few nights," he said. "I want to spend some time teaching you before we get too far into this. Then, as we continue, you'll be able to apply what you've learned. Best you get some sleep. We start first thing in the morning." The smell of rich cacao drifted through the crisp morning air, curling through the trees as the first golden rays of sunlight filtered through the canopy. Ter'Ryn stirred in his bedroll, eyes heavy with sleep, but the steady crackling of the fire and the scent of something warm and sweet made him wake easier. Orin sat cross-legged near the fire, a steaming wooden cup resting in his hands. He wasn't drinking it, just holding it. His posture was straight and his breath was slow, his face unreadable. Ter'Ryn yawned and sat up, rubbing the stiffness out of his arms. The night before had been, quite frankly, exhausting. The long trek through the forest and Orin's words from the night before and vague comments about the Nexus had left his mind swirling. Now, as dawn stretched its golden fingers through the trees, Orin sat like a statue, eyes closed, unmoving. The boy frowned. How long can he sit like that? The fire was little more than glowing embers now, though the cup in Orin's hand still steamed. Ter'Ryn sat up and stretched, but Orin gave no indication that he noticed. Minutes passed, then longer. Ter'Ryn shifted, watching him. The silence dragged on. Finally, after what felt like hours, because it was hours, Orin opened his eyes. He exhaled softly, taking a slow sip from the cup before turning his gaze to Ter'Ryn. "You're impatient," he said simply. Ter'Ryn scowled. "I woke up 2 hours ago. You've just been sitting there doing nothing." Orin raised a brow. "Nothing? That's an interesting way to put it." "Well, what do you call it?" A slow smirk tugged at Orin's lips. "Listening." Ter'Ryn frowned. "To what?" Orin gestured to the forest around them. "Everything." He took another sip, savoring it. "Tell me, what do you hear?" Ter'Ryn exhaled, glancing around. "The fire, the wind, the birds." Orin nodded. "Good. Now, close your eyes and listen again." Ter'Ryn hesitated, but obeyed. He let sounds filter in, the rustling leaves, the distant chirping. He heard the gentle bubbling of a stream nearby. The world was full of sound. Orin's voice came soft but firm. "Now, tell me what you feel." Ter'Ryn furrowed his brow. Feel? His clothes were warm. The ground beneath him was firm. His muscles ached. But then he felt something else. A hum. So faint, it was almost like sensing the weight of the air. A soft current flowing through him, around him, through the trees, the ground, the fire. It wasn't loud, it wasn't forceful, it was just there. His eyes snapped open. I don't know." Orin gave a knowing nod. "You do. You just don't have the words for it yet." He set his cup down and leaned forward. "That hum you felt, that is the Nexus." Ter'Ryn blinked. "That's it?" Orin chuckled. "Were you expecting something more dramatic?" "Kind of." "What, flames erupting from your hands, the ground trembling at your feet?" Ter'Ryn shifted, looking slightly embarrassed. "Maybe." Orin sighed and ran a hand through his short gray hair. "Let me explain something to you. The Nexus isn't a weapon. It's not a force of power you wield. That's the mistake most people make." He tapped his finger against the ground. "The Nexus is connection. It is the current that runs through everything." Ter'Ryn listened intently now. "You felt it just now. You didn't force it. You didn't call upon it. It was just there, because it's always there. The difference between someone like me and someone like the average farmer is that I listen to it, I move with it, I let it guide me, rather than trying to control it." Ter'Ryn frowned. "But you do control it, don't you? You used it before. You told us how many animals were in the barn without looking." Orin shook his head. "I didn't control anything. I tapped in. I let the Nexus show me what was already there." He picked up a stick and held it between his fingers. "Look at this branch. If I threw it in the river, would it move any faster by fighting the current or by flowing with it?" "By flowing with it," Ter'Ryn admitted. "Exactly. The Nexus is the same. It's a river that has always been moving. Most people ignore it or don't even realize it's there. But those of us who can sense it, Orin smiled faintly, we don't command it. We learn how to move with it. Ter'Ryn chewed on that thought for a moment. So the Nexus is always there. Why doesn't everyone hear it? Because most people don't want to. The Nexus is like truth. Most people would rather live without knowing it, because knowing means responsibility, and responsibility is hard. That thought sent a strange chill down Ter'Ryn's spine. Now, Orin continued, standing and brushing off his cloak, we've talked enough for today. Time for a little practice. Ter'Ryn stood as well. What kind of practice? Then Orin smirked. The frustrating kind. For the next hour, Orin had Ter'Ryn balance on a fallen log while closing his eyes and feeling the current. It was the most useless exercise he had ever done. You're just making me stand here, Ter'Ryn grumbled. Yes, Orin said, not disagreeing. He was sitting comfortably on a rock nearby, sipping the rest of his cow. Ter'Ryn scowled. Why? Because you haven't learned to listen. Your body is still fighting. I feel ridiculous. Good, Ter'Ryn groaned. I liked it better when you weren't talking. Orin chuckled. I liked it better when you weren't whining. Ter'Ryn muttered something under his breath but kept his balance. And slowly, very slowly, he reached out and tried to feel it again, sense the hum, the current beneath the world. Orin's voice drifted through the trees. Now, let's see what happens when I throw something at you. Ter'Ryn's eyes shot open. Wait, what? Then something small and round smacked him in the forehead. Ah! Orin grinned. Don't open your eyes next time. As the sun climbed higher, Orin continued his lessons, and Ter'Ryn begrudgingly followed them. The more he listened, the more he realized that the Nexus wasn't some grand, powerful magic. It was subtle, quiet, a whisper, not a roar. And for the first time, he started to hear it, to feel it. And on the third evening, Ter'Ryn made his way to fetch some water. He knelt by the creek, cupping his hands in the cold water and letting it wash over his fingers before filling his water skin. The soft evening light dappled the surface, flickering between the trees as he exhaled, relishing the quiet. Then he heard them. Footsteps. Too many footsteps, moving fast. He didn't turn immediately, he just listened. For a slight scuff of boots against stone. Ray. Ter'Ryn sighed and stood, turning just as the bully and his usual gang emerged from the trees. Ray's smug grin was the same as ever, but there was something else in his eyes. Annoyance. A simmering and boiling frustration. You didn't say goodbye, Ter'Ryn, Ray drawled, stepping forward. His friends fanned out, cutting off any easy escape. And that hurt my feelings. Ray tightened his grip on the water skin. I didn't know you cared, Ray. Ray's grin twitched. Oh, but I do. See, you've been acting different. Walking around like you're better than the rest of us. Leaving with that old man. Thought maybe you'd forgotten where you'd came from. Ter'Ryn said nothing. Ray cracked his knuckles. We're gonna remind you. They rushed him. Ter'Ryn barely had time to react. But he didn't need time. Something in him knew. The air shifted a fraction before the first punch came. He stepped back, not too fast, not too slow, just enough. The swing missed by inches. Another lunged from the left, and Ter'Ryn ducked, twisted, and let the movement guide him. The world seemed sharper. He could feel where they were before they even struck. The second attacker tumbled, thrown off by Ter'Ryn's unexpected movement. The third grabbed at him, but Ter'Ryn twisted free, rolling with the momentum. Stop dodging and fight, Ray snarled. Ter'Ryn's pulse pounded. He was feeling it now. The current beneath everything, guiding his steps. He didn't need strength. He needed flow. Ray lunged again, but this time Ter'Ryn stepped into him, raising a vicious elbow, perfectly timed into the jaw of the heavy bully. The blow completely knocked Ray into half a backflip, landing on his shoulder and his head. A soft moan came from the heap of flesh, and Ter'Ryn turned to face the others. They stood there open-jawed, staring first at their ringleader, near unconsciousness, and then back to Ter'Ryn. Ter'Ryn felt the flow of the Nexus surging through him. midst of it, he could sense the anger turn to confusion and then melt into wide-eyed fear. He saw it in their eyes. Then, one by one, they turned and ran. A slow clap echoed from the trees. Ter'Ryn turned. Orin stood in the shadows, arms crossed, watching, his expression unreadable until he gave the faintest nod. Ter'Ryn swallowed, and he knew he was going to be okay. Thank you for joining me today as we look beyond the well. What lies ahead is not just a tale, it's a journey, one that we will take together. If you're ready to step further into Aldarion, subscribe and follow Beyond the Well wherever you listen to podcasts. For even more information, visit beyondthewell.net for transcripts, notes, character descriptions, maps, and much more. And remember, sometimes the path we walk reveals more than we ever imagined. So, keep seeking, keep dreaming, and keep telling your story. Bye.